it's not fair.
Good evening, everybody.
I just found the keys to a city. The beats are big and the lights are pretty. So why can't we go to the busy where the dreams are in
Alfred,
the sky?
what is the CDC estimate for gun deaths? Give me just the rough number per year.
You have numbers written here that I assume
Alfred,
are
you know what the number is off the top of your head. Give it to me.
Well, but this doesn't make sense. So this is
That's
500,000
different.
to 3 million? That's why I'm asking.
That has nothing to do with the number I'm asking.
Oh, 14,000?
No, that's not it either.
Yes. You said
gun deaths,
33,000.
It is above.
There we go.
It is around 33,000 per year. Alfred, you knew that number.
No, I didn't. I
Really?
had no idea. Well, why would I know that off the top of my head?
Because that's the number that everyone totes for gun deaths.
I don't pay attention to that.
Like CNN, the CDC gives it. Everybody totes that number for gun deaths.
I don't listen to those things. I gotta be honest, I don't listen to a lot of things on this. I don't care about the gun control debate.
Why?
Because I think both sides are reactionary and overblown. I think the NRA has become a shell of its former self. And I think on the opposite side of the aisle, you have a bunch of people who don't know anything about guns who are trying to make dumb, ineffective laws. I mean, look at the state of New Jersey. We have all these stupid laws. There's still plenty of, gun deaths. And honestly, most of them are gang violence or just...
I believe it is a number, let me give you the statistical deviation of plus or minus 10%. It's something like 75% of all gun murder is gang related.
Of course it is, because, frankly, they're either gang related or, unfortunately, domestic violence related. Well, and, generally, you're not going out and shooting your neighbor for no reason.
And with...
Not that any reason would be good, but...
Both of those, it's kind of the question is, well, how much are you really going to solve by regulating the firearms of...
I think that is the key,
Because if you look at domestic violence, okay, those are normally arguably crimes of passion.
I wouldn't even go that far. I would say that it's really an issue of trying to treat the symptoms and not the disease.
Well, yeah.
We have gun
know
violence.
That. We know
exactly, but we have gun
violence. But we got to get to that point in our discussion.
But we don't need to beat around the bush.
Well, let me beat around the bush a little bit.
All right.
I want to have a little bit of fun. So the 33,000 statistic, and put a placeholder right here in domestic violence and gang violence. Gun deaths per year, 33,000. Majority of that number?
Gangs. Oh, no. What are we talking about?
The majority of the 33,000 gun deaths per year.
You go on with this. I'm on a different train of thought here.
Okay, so then you hold our train of thought. The majority of that is suicide. So now if we look...
So mental health issues.
Yeah. If we look at this numerically, though, across other nations, Japan has... some of the strictest gun control laws in the world.
Very high suicide
and some
rate.
of the highest suicide rates in the world. The suicide argument doesn't work well because,
there's obviously
jump out this
different
window.
things. There's different things we need to do to solve that problem. Yeah. And regulating guns is a band-aid.
How are we going to regulate rope?
It's
so
mental health services.
You lock that number off the top. And I have to apologize. 2017 was a high year for gun homicides. For a lot of reasons.
I think, though, in general, it's been trending down over the past 20 or 30 years.
Yes.
So
all crime in the United States has been trending downward since the 60s.
Yeah.
So, however you want to slice that, but we had a spike last year.
Yes.
For firearm homicides. Now, there's a year difference in my numbers. So... bear with me. CDC published information before the FBI published crime rates. So, firearm homicides, there's 14,542 and probably a quarter. Just because that's how statistics normally work. So, an interesting thing to note is a homicide is not... I want to puff on my cigar, so... and I said this in the room, what is a homicide not?
Not necessarily...
Yeah?
A murder?
A crime.
A crime?
A homicide is not necessarily a crime. in the firearm homicide statistics, they use police use of force incidents. They use
self-defense.
They use self-defense, justified homicide. So both of those are typically justified homicides. We
Right.
find some police use their.
So we need to look at unjustified homicides.
So we need to look at unjustified homicide,
to get a good,
which is also just called murder.
yes. Because also an interesting point is we're not taking, even if we magically made all guns in the U.S. disappear, the cops are still going to have guns.
Yes, and
That's another discussion, but
yeah, but the firearm murders in 2016 was 11,004. So you've almost lopped 2/3 of that number off already.
yeah.
So now another thing we have to consider when we get into the gun debate. So now we're looking at 11,000 murders that are unjustified, and then you apply the gang violence. Okay, but let's just say and people are going to have contentions with this number, but the CDC published this data. The CDC used this data point. People say, oh, the CDC haven't researched firearms in years. No. Obama signed an executive order allowing the CDC.
I trust the CDC. I think they generally have reliable data.
So they published this as their accepted data, and people have contentions on this. In the context of 300,000 crimes involving firearms. So there's approximately 300,000 crimes. Now,
So that could be possessing a firearm when you're not supposed to.
That
or
could be.
stealing a gun.
There was someone in New York who just defended themselves with a firearm from a home intruder, and it was the dad's gun. The dad passed away, and New York has very strict laws. That could be someone committed a crime and legally was allowed to carry a firearm, but because they committed a crime,
it became illegal.
The firearm became illegal, or because something they did was because they walked into a bar, it became a crime. So the CDC estimates that there are 500,000 to 3 million defensive gun uses per year. And that range is so big because people don't necessarily report on stuff like that. So they're using crime information. So that ranges from someone saying, hey, go away, maybe not even having a real gun on them.
Yeah.
To
shooting someone.
To, hey, go away, to shooting someone, to shooting at someone, to let me index this gun. We now have some information context. I'll let you pull up what you were going to say before.
Are we rolling back around to the other?
Yes.
So my biggest problem with the gun control debate that we've been talking about is that I think these numbers are so difficult to pin down. I think it's really difficult to compare the numbers in the U.S. to numbers in any other countries because we're not in those countries. And the U.S. is a huge country with radically different geography and populations. Can I pause you there? Yeah.
Interesting thing I noticed the other day. There are some countries that don't report crimes. They don't report crime statistics, and these are developed countries until someone has been convicted of that crime. So if I shot Alfred and ran away and went to Peru and they never found me, they would not report that crime.
So I think that kind of ties in with what I'm saying. It's very difficult to make direct comparisons between countries, and honestly, I don't think it's always a meaningful comparison. It's something that I know you know this. I sit in a lab all day and do a lot of data science, and that's one of the most difficult things to deal with. How do you compare to it? You're constantly faced with this problem of comparing data from two different places when the data wasn't collected the same way. It may not have been. They may not even be looking at the exact same thing. So you get these numbers that are kind of comparable, but rarely paint the whole picture. And when we look at these gun deaths per year in the U.S., it can tell us something on the basic level that, yes, people are dying because of guns. But, the solution is not then to get rid of guns. The solution is to now dig deeper into the data and see what it's actually telling us.
And we see that because you look at the differences, and you have U.S. had, whatever we said, 11,000 firearm murders. And then the UK had something like under 200.
Right. So
at first you're like, wow, the firearms really did a lot. But then the crime rates, the victimhood rates.
Right, so
rates,
how many regular murders are there?
The rape rates in the United Kingdom are 3 times higher than that in America. The crime rates are twice as high.
Really?
Yeah. So, and it's not only... So, and that's where, you look at the defensive gun use number and you can say, okay, lives were saved. No, you can't say how many lives were saved because... You know what? If someone gets raped, they're not dead.
That's true.
It's probably the worst crime that can happen to someone without killing someone.
Right.
But they aren't dead, so that doesn't reflect in the murder statistics.
That's true. So exactly. So there's this huge issue of how do you draw any reasonable conclusions from these numbers that don't always tell the whole story. And I think looking at the gun deaths versus actual unjustified homicides tells a big story. What it really tells us is 2/3 of these gun deaths are super preventable just by, having better mental health facilities, having better support in the communities and stuff. And right off the bat, that's not an issue of these people had access to guns. It's an issue of these people wanted to kill themselves.
And a lot of the people didn't have access to guns.
That's another
which is
thing.
A big thing to note. Because, you know what, let's go back, let's look back in our country's history. People used to be allowed to bring guns into school.
Yeah.
Like high-powered rifles in high school. People would make stocks for them in wood shop. People would work on the guns at school. There was training on how to handle guns at school. We got rid of that. We moved beyond that. Okay, sure. Now you aren't teaching people what to do, which I think is going to be our segment today. If someone walked up, and we've kind of kept this theme going, if someone walked up and found this single-action revolver on the counter, what do you do to keep it safe? We'll jump right into that in a minute. But they used to cover stuff like that in school. And you got away from that.
I think gun safety is a big thing that, isn't really addressed anymore. And I think that goes back to what we were talking about earlier with the responsibility of, of having these rights. There is, we can't have the right to bear arms. We can't have all these guns and then not teach people how to store them safely, what to do if you come across an unsecured firearm.
Which is, fortunately, one of the things the NRA is actually really good at. The NRA...
Yes, they try.
The NRA harps on their safety programs. And, yes, maybe they're not the greatest, but they're basic. And they cover, if you came across a loaded handgun on the table... As a kid, they tell you what to do. But let's get back to...
I think that brings up an interesting point because I live in up kind of in the New York metropolitan area, and so a lot of the people I encounter, or a lot of my friends, have like zero experience with guns.
Yeah.
And one of the biggest things I've noticed is people's fear and discomfort with guns usually comes from a lack of understanding and also kind of an awareness that they don't know what to do if they found a gun, and that makes people uncomfortable, and rightly so. It's a weapon. People are afraid of them because they don't want the responsibility. They don't know what to do with them.
Somewhere down the road, people were taught to be afraid of the unknown.
But I don't think it's. But my point is...
But no, it rolls into your point.
Yes,
We were
but my point is...
We were taught to be afraid of the unknown, and then the only thing they know about firearms is in a movie somebody dies, in the news somebody dies. So
But they are dangerous, and I think that it's a reasonable fear. If you have never had anyone show you how to safely handle a firearm, if I didn't know how to use a firearm and I came across a gun lying around, I'd be afraid of it, because how can I prevent myself or someone else from being injured?
At a minimum, you should know not to grab it.
Well,
at a minimum,
people are dumb sometimes.
And if this was their basic knowledge that was given, don't touch it, call someone.
It's just, in my experience, those same people who are really afraid and uneasy around guns, as soon as you show them how to safely handle firearms, they have a good time. And I don't think I've had an experience with someone who was previously wary or maybe not aggressively anti-gun, but certainly didn't like them. I've never had the experience of that person not coming around and saying, like, well, you know, now that I've handled one and now that I kind of like see how to use them safely and I see what can be done with them, I understand. Like, I'm comfortable knowing that people have them as long as there's safety involved and as long as people, you know, are responsible with them. And I think that's a big part of it, you know? It's the safety and responsibility that we do have.
We're
going to have guns.
That's a good point to close this segment on.
Sure.